Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. Sometime after which it is predicted that he will die from his head injury, but it is not known when that will be at this time. This email is documenting the prediction that singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. At some point later, Simon will die from his head injury. The date that this email is composed, as we can see here, is December 5th. This is at least 2 weeks before the prediction for December 19th. Okay, we can see December 5th right here. Like I said, if you are skeptical, email me and I'll forward this to you. Okay, and yeah, I do not have any ability to alter dates in Google Gmail. Okay, but there are other ways that I am documenting this prediction as well. And so, the prediction that Paul Simon is very important and that his death will be extremely important in God's signs, big picture of signs, which is his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. This has been known, the significance of Paul Simon has been known for many years. It was this year that it was realized that, in fact, he would slip and fall and injure his head. And there are many reasons for knowing that, which are explained in other videos, and I'll likely get into much of it in this video also. But of course, he has a big hit, slidin' away. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to, in each paragraph, describe superficially, surface level detail of reasons, profound reasons, for how this prediction is known ahead of time. As you will see, these reasons could not be concocted in any human being's imagination. You will see that they are clearly from God. In other words, not only does the documentation of the date that this email is composed prove this prediction is being made ahead of time, but the rational person will also recognize that these reasons that I'll be describing could not have been created in someone's imagination. For example, King Apollyon from the bottomless pit is mentioned in Revelation 9:11. Paul Simon sang about the Apollo mission to the moon at Carter's inauguration on the date 119, which hints at Revelation 9:11. King Apollyon is Satan, whose representative is the Antichrist, the 44th president. In Bible prophecy, the Antichrist suffers a mortal head wound. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, died from a head wound in the bathroom of his mansion in the 4x4th state. Many people don't know this, but professionals believe that Elvis Presley, in fact, died from the head injury he suffered 10 years prior in his mansion in Los Angeles, where he fell, as in Fallen Angels, Los Angeles, the angels in Spanish, which caused over time, progressive increase of autoimmune diseases, which he used drugs to counteract. In other words, he didn't really die of his drug intake habits, but the autoimmune diseases that he was suffering as a result of his fall when he knocked his head on his porcelain bathtub in his mansion. He ultimately then died in his mansion, the other mansion, in the 4x4th state. Now, Elvis was the king of rock and roll, which hints at the King Apollyon from the bottomless pit in Revelation 9:11. The Antichrist, the representative of King Apollyon, is the 44th president, and that's why the king died in his mansion in the 4x4th state. The 44th president will reside in the mansion at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. With the addition of Trump's ballroom, that's the 44th prime number of rooms, or semi-prime number of rooms. The king, Elvis, famously covered Paul Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water, and Simon's fourth prime number album, his seventh album, is titled after the king's mansion in the 4x4th state. Graceland is about Elvis's mansion, and Elvis covered Paul Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water. Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head on December 19th, 2025, 1 month and 19 days, which hints at Revelation 9:11 and King Apollyon, after Trump gave an interview from his mansion for the first time to CBS since the $4x4 million lawsuit. Let me just back up. Paul Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water was covered by the king, and that's because King Apollyon and his minions cross the bridge from the bottomless pit into the earthly realm, as symbolized by Revelation 9:11. So that's the significance of Bridge Over Troubled Water here. Now, what I'm saying is that we have this mansion theme in prophetic signs related to Paul Simon, including the king's mansion, which, by the way, is in Memphis, Tennessee, which is named after Memphis, Egypt, in the area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt, Memphis, Tennessee. And the king's mansion, Elvis's mansion, is symbolic of the king's palace in Egypt. In the Bible, the king in his palace is symbolic of the Antichrist, who is the 44th president. Hence why the king's mansion is in the 4x4th state. But Simon's fourth prime number album is titled after the king's mansion. Now, speaking of mansions, 1 month and 19 days, as in Revelation 9:11, King Apollyon, after Trump, so the date that Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head is a prophetic 1 month and 19 days, which hints at Revelation 9:11 and King Apollyon. After Trump gave an interview from his mansion for the first time to CBS since his $4x4 million lawsuit. But this was also the same day that Trump trumpeted that he had renovated the bathroom in the White House mansion that is named after the 4x4th president, President Lincoln. These two mansion Trump signs, Trump's two mansions, were both on the same day. 1 month and 19 days before Paul Simon's predicted fall, and Simon is associated with mansion theme, and also King Elvis, who died from a head injury in his mansion. After he died from his head injury in his mansion, after he hit his head in his other mansion. Speaking of two mansions, Trump has two mansions, as did Elvis. I just realized that. Now, this day that I'm talking about, when Trump trumpeted from the two mansions, or about the two mansions, was October 31st, Halloween. And there's a reason why it was on Halloween. It's because of this theme we were talking about, Revelation 9:11, and the possession of people by demons from the bottomless pit. So this Halloween day was in turn 9 months and 11 days, which also hints at Revelation 9:11 and King Apollyon, after Trump's inauguration, that involved A Sound of Silence. Simon's first big hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence. The Sound of Silence I'm referring to was during the performance at the inauguration of the winner of the 4th American Idol, Carrie Underwood. American Idol hints at the Antichrist, who will be in the White House mansion. And this was the day Trump returned to the White House mansion. And Carrie Underwood famously or infamously fell and hit her head, requiring stitches on her face, at her home, her mansion, if you will, in the 4 times 4th state. And again, she won the 4th American Idol. And again, this was on the day of the Trump return to the White House, which has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Trump's inauguration and his return to the White House mansion on January 20th, 2025. Oh, and her Sound of Silence was when the power cut out, when she was singing America the Beautiful, and then resorted to singing it a cappella. That was a Sound of Silence. There was an awkward period of silence before she cut the silence by saying, "You know the lyrics, help me out here," and then began to sing it a cappella. But there was an awkward period of silence. The music began for like a second or two and then cut out. And then no one knew what to do for a while there. It was a sound of silence. That's because of the sound of silence that's described in heaven at the beginning of Revelation chapter 8 before the 7 trumpet judgments, which is why Paul Simon's most recent album is 7 Psalms, in which he was instructed to make in a prophetic dream with a voice and name it 7 Psalms. And Paul Simon is known for his big hit Late in the Evening, which is a name in itself emphasizing judgment, and the time is running out for repentance, late in the evening. And anyway, that song is famously known for its use of trumpets. And we're talking about trump here, God's trumpet, that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs. So anyway, the sound of silence at the inauguration was 9 months and 11 days before the Trump mansion signs, which in turn was 1 month and 19 days. Both of these connections hint at Revelation 9:11 and King Apollyon, who in the prophecy rises out of his mansion, if you will, his dwelling in the bottomless pit, and crosses over into the earthly realm over the bridge over troubled water, Paul Simon, that King Elvis covered, as in King Apollyon. All right, now, back to what I was saying here. She also hit her head, infamously, requiring a lot of stitches, busted up her head when she fell onto her steps leading up to her house, her mansion in the 4 times 4th state. Now, Trump's inauguration and his return to the White House mansion on January 20th, 2025 was in turn another 9 months and 11 days after Paul Simon sang at a state dinner in the White House mansion. And he sang about traveling to the King's mansion, Graceland, in the 4 times 4th state. That's amazing. Okay? So, from the day that Paul Simon sang in the White House mansion at an official state dinner, it is 9 months and 11 days to Carrie Underwood singing on the day that Trump returned to the mansion, the White House mansion. And then it's another 9 months and 11 days to the signs involving the mansions of Trump's on Halloween, which is then 1 month and 19 days, which also hints at Revelation 9:11, to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and injure his head, just like Carrie Underwood did. Now, another thing is that and I don't think I mention it here in the rest of the paragraph, so I'll just add it. Paul Simon was singing at the state dinner for the prime minister from Japan. And in God's signs, God is using Japan for symbolism for three things, one of them being Japan animation, which is obsessed with which is obsessed with spiritual possession, which hints at demonic possession, which is what is described in this prophecy in Revelation chapter 9, when King Apollyon and the demons rise from the bottomless pit and cross over the bridge into the earthly realm. And that's why Paul Simon's head injury, as I'll explain right here. So, the lyrics of Simon's song Graceland, and by the way, the reason why he sang Graceland is because it was learned that one of the prime minister, well, no, maybe it was just learned that one of the favorite artists of the prime minister is Paul Simon, not necessarily the song Graceland. I don't know. But anyway, there's a connection even between Paul Simon and the prime minister, because it was said in the news story at the time that the reason why Biden chose Paul Simon is because of learning that Paul Simon is one of the prime minister of Japan's famous favorite artists. Okay, so in Bible prophecy, King Apollyon is released from his metaphorical mansion, the bottomless pit, when it is opened with a key. Oh, sorry. The lyrics of Simon's song Graceland begin with and he sang Graceland. That's the song he sang to the prime minister. Begin with the Mississippi Delta. The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar, is the first line of the song, which symbolizes everything. God uses firsts for signs. And at one point in history, before titles were invented, a couple of centuries ago, works of literature or music compositions were known by the first line of the composition. So it was called an incipit. So the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar is the incipit for the song. There's huge significance to this. Mississippi is the 9 plus 11th state to join the Union. More Revelation 9:11 symbolism. King Apollyon. Furthermore, the king's mansion, the Graceland mansion, which Paul Simon is singing about here when he talks about the Mississippi Delta, belonged to the king of rock and roll. Now, in Bible prophecy, King Apollyon is released from his metaphorical mansion, the bottomless pit, when it is opened with a key. The word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Simon was born in the year 41, and he composes using musical keys. And he's known as the GOAT, greatest of all time, of pop American music composition. Simon sang about the king's mansion in the White House mansion on the date 410, which also hints at the number 41. Okay, and again, it's the key that opens the bottomless pit to the King Apollyon and the demons. That's why the 9 months and 11 days connection, and the Mississippi Delta, because it's the 9 plus 11th state. Okay, now the winner of the 4th American Idol, Carrie Underwood, fell and hit her head at her home in the 4 times 4th state, exactly 410 weeks, which also hints at 41, before the death of the composer of one of her hit songs, Jesus Take the Wheel, on September 18th, 2025. And this date is 90 plus 1 plus 1, as in Revelation 9:11, days before the predicted fall and head injury of the GOAT of American pop music composition, who was born in 41. Now, there's more to this, because the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Paul Simon famously dated Shelley Duvall, whom he met on the movie set of Annie Hall. Shelley Duvall starred in the movie The Shining, which is about the demonic possession of a ballroom hall and the hotel, focused on the ballroom hall. And Paul Simon also famously broke up with Duvall at the airport, as in portal for the demons, before she flew to the UK to film the movie The Shining. The Shining is about demonic possession. Paul Simon sang about the Mississippi Delta shining like a national guitar. The Mississippi hints at Revelation 9:11 and the demons. The Shining hints at demonic possession. And Delta is because the demonic possession will be facilitated by delta brainwaves in the brains inside the heads of people, which is why Paul Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head, which is also why Carrie Underwood, the winner of the 4th American Idol, as in the 44th President Antichrist, infamously fell and injured her head in the 4 times 4th state, at her dwelling, at her home, at her mansion. The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar as Paul Simon was traveling to the king's mansion. That's the story of the song in the lyrics. The delta brainwaves will be triggered by frequencies. Music is frequencies. On the gate to the White House, to the Graceland mansion, are big musical notes on the gate, the entrance. Elvis Presley and Paul Simon are the famous singers of American music. Music is frequencies. Furthermore, Carrie Underwood was a musician who sings. And she had her frequencies interrupted during the inauguration, The Sound of Silence. Paul Simon. So you see how all of this is truly stunning. The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar was sung at the White House mansion 9 months and 11 days before Carrie Underwood and The Sound of Silence on the day that Trump returned to the White House mansion, which was in turn 9 months and 11 days before the Trump mansion signs on Halloween, which is in turn 1 month and 19 days to the predicted day that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, because this will be symbolism for the brain injuries that people will suffer after having taken the mark of the Antichrist that contains components that make their way to people's brains, which then will act as transistors for the frequencies to facilitate to engender delta brainwaves and facilitate demonic possession. The mark of the Antichrist is also pointed to through the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, because he famously took an injection before he performed at the Ed Sullivan Show, which changed history, because it changed the baby boomer generation's perception of these things, which radically altered the course of history and the industry for the things, which has ultimately captured the US government and is in control of things. Including the public's perception of these things through propaganda and the capture of the regulatory agencies within the government. Okay, so, yeah. So there you have it. And also that's why Elvis went to the Space Needle in Seattle to film the movie. It happened at the World's Fair because the Space Needle opened for the World's Fair. The Space Needle is symbolism for transhumanism technology, which is the thing that alters people's chromosomes and also will trigger delta brainwaves and demonic possession. And the Space Needle is in King County, right? As in King of Rock and Roll, as in King Antichrist. Also, it is the 42nd state. And the number 42 is symbolic of the period of the time of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. All right, so I think I covered this most astounding first paragraph here. As you can see, No one could have concocted all of this in their own imagination. This was progressively revealed through progressive building, adding to God's big picture of science with more and more signs over the years. Okay, and it's all coming together now at the end with full, complete, or hopefully anyway, understanding of what God is communicating here. All this couldn't obviously have been understood that I've just described here in this video, this first paragraph. All of this couldn't obviously be understood in one download. It took progressive signs over a long time, a trail of signs in which all the signs connected to each other like I'm describing here, in order for God to fully reveal this big picture and this story that he's telling. And that's the thing. None of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs. And this is what is missed by pretty much, I mean, there are some that kind of get this, but the vast majority of people that are interested in prophetic signs do not appreciate this, or not appreciate it fully, I should say. It's only being explained on this channel. And this is also why the fact that this isn't appreciated is the reason why the vast majority of the prophetic signs in general, in the first place, have been unrecognized by others that are interested in prophetic signs. They don't know even what to look for because they haven't been following the connections between the signs. And it has required full-time work from morning until night for more than 7 years to get all of this as well. So it's not like they're to be blamed in a way also. I mean, I don't know how anyone else would even come to this sort of understanding without having been fully dedicated to it. And anyway, as you can see, this is not a product of one's imagination. This is the product of God's prophetic signs. And again, the date proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. All right? So you know what to do depending on who you are when the prediction comes to pass. I'll give you a clue if you do not already know Christ. It's time that you do. It's time that you develop a relationship with Christ. It was Joshua who led the Israelites in their symbolic 3 sets of 7 around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. Simon's third single release from his 7th album was Boy in the Bubble. The third song from the 7th album was inspired by the TV movie Boy in the Plastic Bubble that was produced by the producer of the TV show Seventh Heaven, the longest running drama series in television history, and God uses records and extremes for signs as well. The Bible records that Joshua died at the age of 110. Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after the 110-story towers collapsed. Okay, and he cold opened the broadcast with the song The Boxer. And boxing is about knocking your opponent and having them collapse to the mat, which hinted at the collapse of the towers, being knocked out by the planes. Simon's 7th solo album is named after the King of Rock's mansion. This song, which contains the third song, Boy in the Bubble, inspired by Boy in the Plastic Bubble, that was produced by the producer of the TV show Seventh Heaven. Okay? Now, after lowering his asking price to $11.9 million, which hints at Revelation 9:11, and also 9:11, which Paul Simon also symbolizes because of his opening of the broadcast after 9/11. And again, this hints at King Apollyon. Okay, after lowering his price to $11.9 million, Simon sold his mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, the 5th state, and I'll just say that Revelation 9:11 is within the 5th trumpet judgment, all right? New Canaan hints at the book of Joshua, and the 110 years of age that Joshua died after the symbolic 3 sets of 7. Okay? Okay, so Simon, in other words, the sale of his mansion was a prophetic sign, because obviously Simon sings about the famous Graceland mansion, which I've been talking about in this video already. And so anyway, at one point he lowered his price to 11.9 million, which was prophetic, because that was the first lowering of the price after the initial asking price. All right, and his mansion was sold near New York City, okay, where the towers fell, 110 stories. And the sale of the mansion was exactly 37 months, as in 3 sets of 7, as in the collapse of the walls of security, led by Joshua, who died at 110. Okay, so his mansion sold exactly 37 months before the sale of the mansion in Los Angeles, as in Fallen Angels, that was made, the mansion that was made for the TV show producer who produced the longest running TV drama, Seventh Heaven. So the sale of these two mansions connect with exactly 37 months. And that's relevant because of the third song from Simon's 7th album, which is named after the mansion, Graceland. That song is Boy in the Bubble, and that connects to this TV producer because of Seventh Heaven, because the third song is Boy in the Bubble, and this TV producer also produced the TV movie Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which inspired the song Boy in the Bubble by Paul Simon. See that? Now, the Wall Street Journal news headline regarding this sale included, quote unquote, storied mansion. So the Wall Street Journal, because of the walls of security, collapsed, and Joshua dying at the age of 110 after they collapsed. Okay, so the Wall Street Journal, as in Wall Street, where the foundation of Federal Hall was cracked due to an earthquake that was engendered by the collapse of the towers. And that's where Washington was inaugurated, the first president. Okay, so the Wall Street Journal was the main agency, news agency, to carry this story. And the headline said that the sale was of the storied mansion. Quote unquote, storied mansion. Because of it being made for the TV producer, the most prolific TV producer in history, by the way. God uses extremes and records for signs. So the storied mansion was sold, and 110 stories collapsed on 9/11. The sale of the storied mansion was for $110 million. And it sold exactly 9 plus 11 weeks before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. Do you see how that's all relevant? Because the 9 plus 11 weeks, because 9/11, when the 110 stories collapsed, and this mansion sold for $110 million. And Paul Simon sang to open the broadcast after 9/11. But it all connects through the third song from the 7th album, the producer of Seventh Heaven, the longest TV show. Of course, Seventh Heaven also hints at Simon's album, 7 Psalms, and a sound of silence heard in heaven before the 7 trumpet judgments in the book of Revelation, and on and on. So this is an amazing thing here too in this paragraph, as we can see. And obviously this was not concocted within any human being's imagination. It is proof that this prediction is being made ahead of time. But through all of this, we are getting more understanding regarding this story that God is telling regarding Paul Simon. It is a massive story. Paul Simon is so important in so many different ways. It's like, you know, I don't know how to put a label on it, except to say he's one of the most important people in God's prophetic science. He symbolizes America. Okay, and so here we get a little snapshot of what God is saying or communicating through the signs and through these stories regarding Paul Simon. And the purpose of the stories through the connected signs is to convey and communicate the extremely important knowledge and information that everyone needs to know. Which is why when the prediction comes to pass for Paul Simon's slip and fall and injury of his head on December 19th, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. The cover art for Simon's Seven Psalms album uses Thomas Moran's Two Owls. On the same day of the sale of the mansion that was made for the producer of Seventh Heaven, 4 people were killed in a mass shooting in a bar named the Owl Bar in the 41st state. Simon was born in the year 41. 7 days after the sale of the mansion, owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven, the manhunt for the shooter who killed 4 people in the Owl Bar ended. On the same day that the manhunt ended, 7 days after the shooting, the manhunt that ended for the shooter of 4 people, the winner of the NASCAR race was the winner of the NASCAR race that day was only the 4 plus 4th prime number years old. The 8th prime number of years old NASCAR driver won the race on the date 8-8. And while celebrating in Victory Lane, he slipped and fell off of the roof of his car that was number 88 in front of the press cameras. The reason for all of this is because of the sound of silence that begins with, that's the first verse in the 8th chapter of Revelation, which connects to Paul Simon because of the sound of silence that launched the beginning of his career. The beginning of the 8th chapter of Revelation and the 7 trumpets of judgment, the beginning of Paul Simon's career, the sound of silence. But there's more to this. The 8th prime number of years old driver slipped and fell off the roof of his car, number 88, on the date 8-8, exactly the 8th prime number of weeks, before it is predicted that the composer of the album, that has owls on its cover, will slip and fall and injure his head. Okay, so the driver slipped and fell off the roof of his car and broke his collarbone in front of the press cameras. The car was number 88, the date was 8-8, and 19, the age of the driver, is the 8th prime number. And this is exactly 19 weeks, or the 8th prime number of weeks, before the predicted slip and fall and injury of the head of Paul Simon. So you see, that's amazing, right? December 19th is exactly the 8th prime number of weeks after the 8th prime number years old driver slipped and fell off the 88 car on the date 8-8. But it was also the same day as the manhunt that ended for the shooter of the Owl Bar, and Paul Simon's recent album is on its cover depicting owls. It's 2 owls, by the way. The shooter at the Owl Bar shot 4 people. 2 times 4 is 8. Wow, that just came to me, actually. Yeah, that always happens as I'm going through the information, as I'm recording it. Every time you go over the information, new inspiration comes. And so, yeah, no kidding. So, yeah, why wasn't the date, people? Didn't need to be. Because there's 2 owls on the cover of Simon's album. And again, it was in the 41st state. Simon was born in 41. 41 equals key in simple English gematria. A key opens the bottomless pit to King Apollyon, et cetera, like I explained earlier. So 2 owls on the cover and 4 people shot in the Owl Bar hints at 2 times 4 equals 8. It also hints at 2 4s, by the way, and the 44th president, the Antichrist. And that's relevant to Paul Simon's head injury because the head injury symbolizes the demonic possession of those who take the mark of the Antichrist that will be enforced by the Antichrist. God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections to confirm the signs and connections. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together. And I know which numbers they are. It's 23 and 44. Okay, these are the numbers. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections for more than full-time hours from morning until night for more than 7 years. That said, this realization came near the beginning of that 7 years because the pairings of 23 and 44 are the building blocks for God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And the reason why pairing 23 and 44 together is because the 44th president is the basketball president who wore jersey number 23. The 4 plus 4th prime number of years old driver slipped and fell off of car number 44 plus 44 on the same day that the manhunt ended for the killer of 4 people in the Owl Bar shooting, and the manhunt for the shooter of 4 ended exactly 4 times 4 weeks before 2 National Guardsmen were shot by the shooter from the 03 unit in Afghanistan. 2 shot guard by the shooter of 03 unit hints at the number 23. That's the name of the unit that the Afghani was involved in, operated through the CIA. So he shot 2 from the 03 unit, hints at 23. The 2 guard were shot by the man from 03 unit exactly 23 days before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. This 23 days connection to the 2 shot guard by the 03 unit parallels, pairs with the 4 times 4 weeks connection back from the 2 shot for the 03 guard, which is another pairing of 23 and 44, to the manhunt that ended for the 4 people. On the day that the 4 plus 4th prime number years old driver slipped off of his car, number 44 plus 44, on the date 4 plus 4 / 4 plus 4, the date 88. Okay, so you got many different pairings of 23 and 44 there. The 4 times 4 weeks and the 23 days pairs, because they connect with each other, but also in between is the 2 shot by the 03 guard, which pairs with the 44 weeks and also pairs with the 23 days. But that ultimately also pairs with the 44s involved with the manhunt for the shooter that shot 4 people. And Paul Simon's album depicts 2 owls. That gives us 2 4s. Because the Owl Bar shooting 4 people in the 41st state, Paul Simon was born in 41, and his album depicts 2 owls. That's 2 times 4 equals 8, or also 2 4s, 44. Okay, this is amazing. This paragraph here is a continuation of this paragraph. If I choose to put these 2 paragraphs into separate videos, hopefully you're watching them in chronological order, I suppose, because a lot of this is talked about in this paragraph here too. At the end of the last video for this paragraph, I mentioned how hopefully you are watching these videos in chronological order. I recommend that in general, by the way, because if you watch the videos in the order of the most recent video posted, you will be watching the videos in reverse order from which the insights came, because the insights build on themselves. So it's wise in general to go back as far as you can and start from there and go forward. Just in general, it's just a guideline. I'm just giving you a guideline there. It's not necessarily what you need to do at all. But in general, that's how it works. In the case of this video, we're talking about the reasons for December 19th. And, well, anyway, these 2 paragraphs, like I said, overlap each other. Well, anyway, I just thought I would add that it's a good idea to, try to watch the videos in chronological order. In other words, the order in which I post them, not the ones most recently posted back in time, and going from that direction back in time. All right. Now, well, speaking of, chronological, I already mentioned the sale of Paul Simon's mansion. All right, and also the sale of the mansion made for the TV producer of Seventh Heaven. So this is another example of how if one's watching these videos in chronological order, you should be doing this, at least for this. For the December 19th videos, I recommend you doing that. It's not even just a guideline. Okay, I changed my mind. Well, anyway, whatever. So back to what I was saying here. The sale of the mansion that was built for the producer of Seventh Heaven, the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling, was sold on the date 8/1. I already explained the prophetic significance of the sale of the mansion in the other paragraph. This hinted at the sound of silence by Simon and Garfunkel that was heard in heaven in Revelation 8:1. Okay? So in other words, prior to 8:1, it was recognized ahead of time that God was overwhelmingly pointing to this date regarding Paul Simon. And naturally, it made perfect sense that Paul Simon would die on August 1st, 8/1. Because this is how it works, right? God points to a date regarding the theme, the prediction, and it's not necessarily known ahead of time whether or not that date will be another step in the trail of signs or be the end of the trail. And without any other information, you have to conclude that it's the end of the trail. And so, in other words, I made a lot of videos explaining how God was pointing ahead of time to August 1st, 8/1, because of Revelation 8:1. There was so much connections from other prophetic signs and confirmation, and amazing, profound information contained in the stories that God is able to tell through the connections, like I explained earlier, that you need to watch them. But what I also want to tell you is that all of the analysis, all of the explanations for the connections from other signs to August 1st, 8/1, that hinted at Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence in heaven, all of that analysis, all of those videos are 100% correct. 100% true. I hope I'm clear. I know far better than anyone, including you, the reason and purpose for this video and this prediction from God. And I know how God's big picture of signs works. And no, the videos that predicted Paul Simon would die on August 1st were not, quote unquote, wrong. It was all 100% correct. Therefore, God did it, and therefore, you need to learn what God did. Just because the videos that talk about August 1st did not come to pass that Paul Simon died on August 1st, does not mean that you don't need to watch them. You need to watch them, and they are equally valid as this video that's predicting December 9th. And who knows, December 19th. And who knows, December 19th might also be a step in the trail. In fact, it's a 50-50% chance. I have no idea. But knowing how God's science works, I know that there's a good chance that it will just be a step in the trail. But I also know that God is overwhelmingly pointing to December 19th. And if Paul Simon doesn't slip and fall and injure his head on this date, you can expect, or we can expect, most definitely, clear and relevant prophetic signs to occur on this date, which will reveal more information, which will lead further down the path, further down into the future, to the ultimate date that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. Okay? Now, so that's the story about August 1st. I really needed to get into that because you need to watch the August 1st videos. And there's a ton of them. There's probably like 15 to 20 videos. And they're all correct. They're all amazing information that everyone needs to know. Okay? Enough said. Now, following the sound of silence in heaven, in the 8th chapter of Revelation, is the destruction of ships that is described in Revelation 8:8. This description is a parallel with the ships described in Isaiah chapter 23. So a lot of Book of Revelation prophecy is a parallel with prophecy in the Old Testament. And in this case, the ships. So I've never heard this anywhere else, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that others aren't talking about it somewhere, out there. But it's clear that the ships are not arbitrary. God's not talking about ships and the destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8 for any old reason. It's not just for poetry. It means something. It's symbolism. And the more you understand Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation, the more you appreciate the symbolism and allegory in the prophecies, in direct contrast to what Chuck Missler used to say. Chuck Missler, I know there's a lot of fans of him out there. I'm, to a degree, a fan of his also. But he was misguided and not very insightful on a number of important things, I have to say, including this concept of taking the book of Revelation increasingly more literally as you get into it. And that was the big mistakes that he made in his prophetic analysis, is that he didn't appreciate abstraction and symbolism. It wasn't inspired. A lot of what he said, the insightful things that he talked about, were not his discoveries. He was like the pioneer for gathering information that other people were discovering on the internet and putting into presentations. He himself didn't really make these discoveries that he often talked about. He was a good communicator, but he didn't really, in my opinion, get it. And fundamentally, when he talked about interpreting the book of Revelation literally, and increasingly more literally as he gets into it, is the exact opposite, is the truth. So the ships are symbolism for something. What are they symbolism for? Well, this is something that I don't think is being explained anywhere else out there, which is that there are people that claim that America is nowhere in Bible prophecy. But they couldn't be further from the truth. And furthermore, of course we would expect this to be the case, that there would be America throughout the prophecies. And there is. It's amazing when you understand what God is doing. The prophecies regarding ancient Tyre are symbolism for America. The reason is ancient Tyre was known and was prosperous because of its natural protection of oceans all on each side. America is providentially protected from God by oceans on all of its sides, if you think about it even. It's not just the Atlantic and Pacific, it's also the Arctic, and then it draws down into a narrow peninsula with the North America is completely surrounded by ocean. Vast ocean. Anyway, and there's proof of this in God's big picture of signs, involving signs that hint at ancient Tyre, including the professional NFL player Tyreek Hill, for example, whose mansion roof burned on a date we were expecting a Paul Simon sign. And sure enough, we had a mansion sign, and there's this theme regarding mansions in Paul Simon signs, okay, that I've explained already in this video, or in prior paragraphs anyway, in this email thread. So anyway, I'm not going to explain the Tyreek Hill signs, but anyway, that's just one example. Now, in Isaiah chapter 23, we have a description of judgment on ancient Tyre, but also Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish. And there's a euphemism regarding Tarshish in the prophecy, which is the ships of Tarshish. God refers to Tarshish as the ships of Tarshish. Tarshish, we know from ancient evidence, clearly was Great Britain. And Great Britain was set apart, just like the Jewish people were set apart. The word set apart is holy in Hebrew. That's the word holy in Hebrew, means set apart. Great Britain was set apart from the rest of Europe for God to create this unique culture and language that he would use to spread the gospel around the world through also its daughter, America. The daughter of Tarshish in the prophecy is America. Great Britain became powerful, and the empire of a Great Britain the sun never set on because of its naval power and its merchant ships and its trading on the high seas. Likewise, America is the dominant power in the world, largely due to its navy, which can project power anywhere in the world through the through the oceans and its aircraft carriers. And anyway, these two nations were set apart. They were surrounded by ocean, which compelled them to become powerful navies. And that's why the ships of Tarshish is referred to. It's America. It's symbolism for America. Again, you need to appreciate symbolism to be able to appreciate Bible prophecy. Now, there's all kinds of more proof. I'm just scratching the surface here, right? We've got pairings of 8 and 23. For example, the Washington, D.C. earthquake on the date 8/23. It's because of this parallel that identifies America with Revelation 8, and specifically also Revelation 8:8, but also with Isaiah chapter 23 and the ships. In other words, the destruction of ships in Revelation chapter 8 is symbolic of the destruction of America. This chapter begins with the sound of silence, which points to Paul Simon, whose career began with Sound of Silence. And Paul Simon has a big hit named America. Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning of judgment for America on 9/11, which is why Paul Simon, at the other end of bookend, opened the broadcast after 9/11 on Saturday Night Live with the boxer, as in knocking the opponent out and collapsing to the mat, as in collapsing of the towers. And so Paul Simon's album Bookends is the album that contains the song America. In other words, Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the opportunity for America to have repented. And his death will symbolize that that opportunity is now finished, complete, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. Yeah. When Paul Simon's death happens, it's over. I mean, I don't mean to be cynical. I just know what God is doing, and I know this from his big picture of signs. And those that are still hoping for and praying for revival, I don't want to say don't stop praying for that, but it's not going to happen. Okay? I don't mean to, and maybe it's not meant to be that the knowledge of what God is doing in his big picture of signs doesn't come until after the death of Paul Simon, so that people continue to pray for this revival that they're hoping will happen. But I know it's not going to happen because the big picture of signs reveals God's timing. And so does Bible prophecy, furthermore, for those that understand it. It's not a mystery. The doctrine of imminence is a heretical, false doctrine from Satan. No one knows the hour. Day or hour is a misinterpretation and a mistranslation. Furthermore, there's a parenthesis there, which is involving Noah and the timing of the judgment. And Noah knew precisely the time of the judgment. We also have Amos 3:8, God's servants. God does nothing without his servants first knowing. All of his servants knew the precise timing of his judgment, whether it be Lot or Noah. Likewise, of course, his servants who are watching, as Jesus commanded, will obviously know the precise timing. And anyway, there's all kinds of other contradictions, all kinds of other passages that flatly contradict this doctrine of imminence, which is used as an excuse by those that are mostly still living in the world, barely living indistinguishable lives that are indistinguishable from other non-believers, but also it's used as an excuse to not watch, which Jesus commanded people to do, which is why in Revelation 3:3 he said, "Therefore watch, for if you do not watch, you will not know at the hour which I will come against you. Therefore, if you are watching, you will know the hour." That's quite clear. One contradiction to the doctrine of imminence right there, right in front of your face. Revelation 3:3. All right. Now, so where was I here? So what I was getting at was this explanation for how the ships described in Revelation chapter 8 and their destruction is symbolism for the destruction of America, because the ships symbolize America. I've made that clear now. So Paul Simon's hit song, Slip Slidin' Away, is from his 4th solo album. The song America, by the way, is from this fourth Simon and Garfunkel album. Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall 23 days after 2 guard were shot by the man from 03 unit, which since it's 23, which was exactly 4 times 4 weeks, a pairing of 23 and 44, as I explained earlier. But this is also 8 plus 8 weeks. After the 8th prime number of years old driver slipped and fell off of his car 88 on the date 88. But we can pair it, 8 pairs with 23, as I mentioned, because of Isaiah chapter 23 and Revelation 8 regarding the ships that symbolize America. But also 23 and 44 pair together because the 44th president also is the basketball president who wore 23, as I explained earlier. So this 8 plus 8 weeks is also 4 times 4 weeks, which pairs with the 2 shot guard by the 03 unit. Now, on the same day, when the driver slipped and fell off his car number 88 on the date 88, as in Revelation 88 regarding the ships, was reported that a water slide on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship busted when a man was sliding on it. Sliding away. And this hints at the destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8, because it occurred on the date 88. Sliding Away, the song was released from the album in 77, and this water slide on the ship busted 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of the TV show Seventh Heaven, and on and on. So hopefully you are watching these videos in chronological order. I will also produce a video that has all of the paragraphs combined. I'll also make a video that doesn't divide up these paragraphs. All right. So anyway, because I explained the significance of the Seventh Heaven mansion earlier, but it's 7 days to the sliding away sign, and sliding away was released in 77. Okay. And it's a ship sign. And Paul Simon, Sound of Silence, at the beginning of Revelation 8, chapter 8:8, is this destruction of ships. And it was a destruction of a ship sign because it was the destruction of the slide. It's amazing. It's amazing, right? And it was also on the day of the guy that slipped off the car, number 88, on the date 88. The guy busted the slide while he was sliding on the ship the day that the guy slipped and fell off of his car, number 88, on the date 88. And he was the 8th prime number of years old. And it's exactly the 8th prime number of weeks before Paul Simon's predicted slip and fall on December 19th. It's amazing. The song that Simon wrote that launched his career was Sound of Silence. A sound of silence is observed in heaven at the beginning of Revelation chapter 8. Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head on December 19th, 2025, exactly 8 plus 8 plus 8 weeks after destructive river flooding killed young camp girls on the river in Texas. This flooding occurred near where Paul Simon and his wife Edie Brickell live. In other words, this prophetic flooding pointed to Paul Simon. I've explained much more regarding how this is in another video, which is titled the Camp Mystic flooding, etc. Okay? Texas flooding video. But anyway, this is a superficial, like I'm saying at the beginning of this video, this is a superficial description of some of the connections that prove this December 19th date is known ahead of time through God's connections from prophetic signs. So, again, the flooding occurred near where Paul Simon and his wife Edie Brickell live. Brickell is known for her one-hit song in which she sings in its chorus, "Choke me in the shallow water." That's the river flooding. The young girls at the camp choked in the shallow water. Then shallow river flooding came upon the campers in the middle of the night unexpectedly as a wall of water, quote unquote. The media described it as being a wall of water. The Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 that was more precisely a 7 plus 7 times 7 before the walls of security unexpectedly collapsed on Jericho, like the unexpected wall of water in the middle of the night. 8 plus 8 plus 8 weeks is also 7 plus 7 times 7 plus 7 plus 7 times 7 plus 7 plus 7 times 7 days. And God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its meaning, symbolic meaning. 8 is associated with Paul Simon because of Revelation chapter 8, which I've been explaining in this video. But the chapter begins with the sound of silence observed in heaven, and Paul Simon's career launched with the sound of silence hit. Okay, and furthermore, in Revelation chapter 8, following the sound of silence is the 7 trumpet judgments. Paul Simon's recent album is 7 Psalms, which he was instructed to make in a prophetic dream with a voice telling him to do so and name it 7 Psalms, which hints at the 7 trumpets. And the 7 trumpets were blown in part of the 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted when the walls of security unexpectedly collapsed on Jericho, which is why we have this 8 plus 8 plus 8 weeks connection, or also 7 plus 7 times 7 plus 7 plus 7 times 7 plus 7 plus 7 times 7 days. From the wall of water, near where Paul Simon lives with Edie Brickell, who's known for Choke Me in the Shallow Water, to the day it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. This is merely scratching the surface of the reasons for how this prediction is known in advance. For more information, please visit odyssey.com, spelled ODYSEE.com, or rumble.com video channels named Asteroid Prediction. And also read the website www.trumpprediction.com.